everyone, it's Angela from Cake Angel, and today I'm going to show you how to make a cookie by taking inspiration from something a little different. So this is a cake pick that I found in a craft store and I really liked him, so I'm going to replicate him on a cookie. So I just have a standard shaped cookie and I'm going to use an edible marker to mark the outline of the cactus. Now you can use any colour of edible marker for this, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to focus on doing the outline and also just a couple of the stripe details on the cactus as well. So this will give me a guide of where I need to flood each of my colours, and I'm actually going to do the flooding straight away one after the other so that we avoid any colour bleed. And what we'll need to do once the flooding has been done, the cookie will set for about 24 hours to ensure that it's completely dry, but we'll get to that once we're done with our flooding. So I'm just marking in those stripes, so those will be a different colour green. And now we're ready to flood. So it's entirely up to you which way you do this. You can start with the outside colours or you can do an inside colour. Doesn't really matter. We're just going to use the guides that we've drawn on with our edible marker and then go from there. So I'm going to start with my white first. I am using a thin consistency royal icing for all of this, and I'm just going to trace the outline and mark out everything that needs to be white. And as always, when you're flooding cookies, don't worry if your lines aren't perfectly straight. We're going to be able to change those with our cookie scribe. And also when you flood the icing inside the outline, that helps push everything into place as well. Okay, so there's our first outline done. So the next thing I'm going to do is straight away start to fill all of that in. So you want to do this straight away because you don't want the white outline to start to crust over at all. Otherwise you'll get an outline on the edge of your cookie. If you like that style of decorating, then you can absolutely let the outline dry first. But for this one, I just want it all to look like it's wet on wet. So I'm flooding it straight away. So I'm just making sure that I'm going all the way up to the edge. And then we're going to go back with the scribe afterwards and tidy it up. So let's go on to the other side. And same thing again, you'll notice I'm going back and forth. That's just to keep the icing flowing. And it also helps to stop it drying out as you're flooding, as you'll tend to find that the very edges that you flood will start to crust over quicker. So you want to just keep working back and forth to avoid that happening. So I'm just adding a little bit of extra there to avoid any cratering. So cratering happens when you have a little bit less icing in the cookie and it naturally starts to pull towards the edges. So if you pipe a little bit extra, you'll get more of a puffy look to your cookie. I'm just going to tidy that up with my scribe tool, making sure that I've got a nice edge to the cookie. I'm not going to worry too much about the area that I've left in the middle because I'm going to go ahead and pipe my next colour in that straight away. So we're going to do the darker green next. So when you're using Tipless bags and you're cutting them, I find it's easier if you hold it with the seam facing towards you and then just snip a little bit off. And then if you just give it a little bit of a squeeze before you start piping, you can make sure that you've cut a nice straight edge for your Tipless bag. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to outline my green, and this is going straight up to the edge of the white. And because both icings are the same consistency and it's being done straight away, they won't bleed into each other. So next I'm just going to outline the inner areas that are a different green, and this will stop it from flooding into itself. And there's just a couple of those little details on each of the arms of the cactus. And then we're going to fill the rest of it in as we work our way around. So you can see I'm still doing that back and forth movement again when I'm flooding, and this is to stop the edges crusting over, as I mentioned with the white. Let's get another one of those outlines done. And then the last one. And then we can fill the rest of the green in. So I'm just going to use my Scribe tool to tidy those up a little bit, and you can see that the areas that we outlined haven't flooded, so that's kept them nice and clear for the next colour. It's going to do the same thing again with this bag. We're going to hold it with the seam pointing towards us and then snip the end off. Now always make sure when you're cutting the ends off you do that away from your cookie, because you want to make sure that the end of the bag doesn't actually drop on your icing. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill that. So we're filling each of those little lines in. And it's just little accents of colour, so you don't need too much icing. You can see how that works as a wet and wet, and it just kind of melts into itself. And if you need to tidy up anything, just use a Scribe tool for that. And if you don't have a Scribe tool, you can always use a toothpick for that instead. And what I'm doing here is just lengthening those lines, which really gives it a nice effect of bleeding into the other colour. And this is the type of bleed that we want, where there is shading on something and it would naturally bleed in on an actual cactus. So next thing we're going to do is the white on the hat. Now I'm actually not going to do the bobble on the end of the hat yet. I'm going to do that once it's dry so that it will be a little bit more raised. And the last colour that we need to do is our red. So we're just adding the little details on the ends here on both sides. And then we're going to fill in the Santa hat as well. Okay, so let's just tidy it up again with the Scribe, make sure that we've got the nice shape. Just want to accentuate some of these little areas. Okay, just having another look and making sure that it looks okay. So you'll notice I'm using a turntable. This is actually a large one from IKEA, but you can get smaller cookie ones as well. I find it's really useful to do that rather than actually touching the cookie all the time and turning it, as you could end up accidentally putting your fingers in the icing, which would spoil the cookie. Okay, so this is the cookie at the first stage where the flooding has been completed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to sit for 24 hours before we can move on to the next stage. So next I'm going to use an edible marker to mark the outlines, just to make the cactus pop a little bit from the cookie, and I'm using black here. This is a two-sided edible marker, and I'm using the thinner side so I can get a really nice outline. I'm just working my way around all of the sections. So you'll see on the cake pick that it's actually outlined in greens and blues and reds, but I decided to use black. I think it stands out really nicely when you have a cookie with this sort of design. So we're just going to go around the red area as well. And again, your cookie needs to be fully dry when you do this. Edible markers have a tendency to kind of push through the icing if it isn't fully dry. You could speed up that process by using a dehydrator, or as I've done here, you just leave it on the counter for 24 hours and then you should be good to go. Okay, let's have a close-up look at that. You can see already that it makes it stand out a little bit better. So the next thing I'm going to do is the spiky bits that stick out on the cactus, and I'm going to use that second green colour for that. So it's just a series of lines on each one. And the reason we're doing this once the cookie is dry is just to make it stand out a little bit more. It adds a little bit of 3D effect to the cookie. There we go, what a difference, don't you think? Next thing we're going to do is take our white icing, and now we're going to add the pom-pom onto the end of the hat. So this is just holding the piping bag and squeezing until it builds up and you get a nice little ball of icing. And you're just going to give that a shake to help it settle. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to add the string of lights. So I just let it sit for about 5 minutes before I did this, just to help that white crust over. So I'm just taking some thin black icing. I've cut a really small hole in my bag, and I'm just drawing the lines across the cactus. Make sure whenever you're piping lines like this as well, that the tip is off the surface. You never want it touching the cookie, as you want the icing to flow really nicely, as that'll give it a really nice rounded look as well, instead of it being flat. Okay, so this is coming together really nicely. I think that's a nice little detail to add. And the last thing we're going to do is just add the sprinkles to it. I'm just checking my icing, so it's quite dry in my kitchen when I'm making this, and it's dried out a little bit too quickly, so I might have some trouble with the sprinkles sticking, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyways. Ideally, you want it to just dry out for a couple of seconds so that the icing is sticky enough for the sprinkles to stick to it, but as you can see, mine is a little on the dry side and they're kind of running away from me a bit. So if you do have a go at doing this, make sure you don't let your icing dry for too long before you start attaching the sprinkles. Already you can see though, this really kind of takes the cookie to another level, makes the colours pop. And I've sped this part up so you don't have to watch me painfully fight with the sprinkles to try and get them to stick to the icing. Again, when you do this, make sure that you do the sprinkles a little sooner than I did so you won't have this problem. But there we go, there's our cookie all nice and finished. And doesn't it look great? You can see how I took the original inspiration and turned it into a cookie. Hope you found that useful. Lots of great techniques covered in this tutorial, so please let me know if you have a go. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and thanks so much for watching.